uh, those who are here in our Zoom and watching through our live broadcast. This is Fight for Our Rights, a webinar on judicial harassment against indigenous people. This is presented to you by the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, IPMSDL, with the support of ICNL International Center for non-profit law, and with the support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, Canada. So thank you so much for joining with us. This webinar will talk about actually on the ongoing project, the ongoing program of ICNL, of the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, in relation to countering judicial harassment of civil society representatives and human rights defenders from marginalized communities. So ICNL, together with IPMSDL, is implementing an ongoing program that focuses on the judicial harassment of indigenous peoples organizations, and communities in 3 particular areas in Asia. So our program focuses on these issues and concerns in the Philippines, in Northeast India, and in West Papua. So to give you an overview or a picture of how judicial harassment is faced by our indigenous peoples, leaders, organizations, and communities in relation on how they stand up and defend their right to self-determination, stand up and defend their right for their ancestral lands and territories. We will hear from some of the leaders and our partners from the 3 different areas and territories that we talk about. So I will not give you so much time. And after each of the speaker, later on, we will have a forum, a question and answer portion, and an open forum. So you can send in your questions through our chat on our comment box, and we will try, our speakers and our representative will try to address them. And also our friends, our colleagues also work on this area, in the area of law and legal support in relation to our topic on judicial harassment. So to start our discussion, let's hear from our first speaker. We have here Mr. Jiten Yumnam, the Secretary General of the Center for Research and Advocacy in Manipur, to share to us how are they implementing this program, how are they facing and their experiences, and how they address and push back and stand up on this issue. Good afternoon, Jiten.
Good afternoon, Paul, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to meet everyone in this discussion and sharing. First of all, I will share on the context as to how the judicial harassment is happening in the northeast part of India. Broadly, the harassment is increasing in so many different contexts, different aspects. This northeast India and many of the region in northeast part of India that includes the states of Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Meghalaya. So these are some of the provinces, Meghalaya. So many of these are already afflicted with an armed conflict situation where many of the indigenous communities are striving for asserting the right to self-determination, varying from autonomy to complete self-determination, but more focusing on the control of land, management of land and territory. So the context of conflict is is in such a way that there is heavy militarization in many of the indigenous people's land and territory in our region. And on the part of India, the response is often military, which means there is a military response to the ongoing self-determination movement. And some of the indigenous groups actually took up arms and waging an armed liberation movement. So on the part of India, the response is the enactment of emergency law like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and then also the application of other criminal laws, no? Which includes the National Security Act, which is more like a preventive detention law, and then also the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act. So which means there are a series of human rights violation and targeting of many of the indigenous rights defenders, especially those who are striving for justice, seeking justice for the rights violations. So the conflict dimension is one of the region where, and also there is an ongoing demand for the repeal of this Armed Forces Special Powers Act and other security and criminal laws, because this has been abused and this has been widely used to target the human rights defender and also the many of the indigenous community. So this is one of the first foremost contexts as to how we are experiencing the judicial harassment in the context of conflict. The second aspect is, unfortunately, our land is blessed with rich mineral and natural resources. Some of the most beautiful rivers it flows in our land, and then many of the minerals, major minerals and minor minerals. And so there is an intensive effort to target our river and land and forests for construction of large dam, for mining operations, for oil and gas, and also the construction of heavy infrastructure projects, road, transmission line, oil pipelines. So a lot of indigenous community which are affected by this push for mega extractive and energy project, many of the communities who resist or who assert their rights to defend the land are increasingly targeted. So the harassment, judicial harassment, is taking place in the context of curbing the community rights, restricting community rights. So we have several cases where, like in Arunachal Pradesh, even in Manipur, where many of the community leaders who stand against large dam, like in here we have several dams like the Kuga Dam and also the Mapitel Dam, and even in Arunachal Pradesh there is this place called Tawang, where community who resist a series of dam plant over the Tawang River are arrested, and not just arrested, but several are killed during protests, during firing of live bullets. And then also recently there was this case where we also respond just recently last year, where an artist was arrested because he was drawing up this slogan, anti-dam slogan, and yeah, so he was arrested and then detained and then come up with all kind of false charges. And so that is also one of the contexts that we are experiencing, people who are defending the land, people who are standing up for their rights, and people who are questioning the unsustainable developmental projects, so-called developmental projects that intrude on the land, that fail to take the free prior informed consent. I think these are, many of the communities are targeted. So the harassment is taking place, especially targeting the community leaders and also members of the community who are standing up for the rights over the land and resources. So that's happening in our context. And then the third is, which is very, it's again a big concern in our case, because now our forest has been targeted increasingly because of the so-called climate change solution. And so now we are seeing an increased intensification of the creation of national park and protected area, especially the protected area creation is happening at an alarming rate. So left and right, many of the communities are served with eviction notice and explanation as to why they are settling there without possessing valid legal documents and all. So this has put many of the communities into a nightmare, and then several evictions are happening. So the eviction just in Manipur, just 3 days back, there was this eviction in this place called Songsang Village. And then last year in December, end of last year, early part of this year, there was this eviction in this place called Kangsup Siru, when the eviction happened, so the community leader, community members who resist eviction and who are against the creation of a protected area in the land, in their forest. Many of them are arrested and several are beaten up and tortured. No, so I think this is happening increasingly. This is another form of harassment that's been a matter of big concern all over Northeast. No, especially in Manipur, we are confronting this case, and also there is this push for this palm oil, no, massive plan to push for palm oil cultivation around 3.28 million hectares of land. The government has announced the creation of palm oil, not to serve India's food and edible oil security. So these are some of the contexts that we are operating at this point of time. So in terms of response, we are trying to understand what is happening and also try to create awareness among the different communities who will be affected, who are already affected, no? And we try to provide whatever support in terms of advocacy, because advocacy, media advocacy, and then linking them with the Human Rights Commission and the relevant institutions. I think that is also one another context. And then we also try to reach out to the International Human Rights Group or even to the UN agencies, no, try to raise at least people's voice. Another one is also to build the strength and capacity and also the solidarity of the different groups, indigenous groups who are already targeted and who are threatened with eviction and other form of judicial harassment. So that is what our response at this point of time. And we also saw that during the COVID-19 restrictions recent year, no, we also see is a lot of community members are arrested or even detained, no, because for speaking up or for raising concern on the restrictive measures, no, because the restrictions had already infringed on the rights and the community rights, no. So there are a lot of inconvenience and a lot of problems, and then the issues of the lack of infrastructure, health infrastructure especially, and then so many of the communities who raise concern are targeted. Another aspect that we join, which we also advocate, is we join the human rights group and other groups indigenous group to call for repeal of many of the criminal law or many of the emergency law, because this has been a very big challenge for us. Now, a lot of laws, the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act, the new dilutions, and then the AFSPA, the Special Powers Act, all of these are what that's creating a lot of it facilitates the harassment of the communities. No, it's extremely difficult for those who are charged, who are accused, to prove innocence, no, under the new and also the amended legislations. So we call for amendment or for a complete scrapping of many of these legislations. And another form of harassment is targeting the human rights organizations or indigenous organizations. So now India comes up with this law called the Amendment to the Foreign Contribution and Regulation Act. So these are laws and legislation which are aimed to curb the functioning of the human rights or indigenous human rights group. No? So it try to restrict access to donor support for human rights work. No, or I think this is also one of the big concerns. No? So we join the call to amend or to scrap this kind of laws that inhibits the functioning and rights of the human rights defenders. Overall, and then additionally, we also question the unsustainable development model. We also question the unsustainable development push in our region, apart from supporting the different indigenous group to assert their rights over the land and resources. We also call for the recognition of indigenous people's rights. We call for the recognition of the importance of the role of human rights defenders. No, and along with that, we stand against. I think we campaign against false climate solutions, which set the premise to target our forests. They set a premise to target our land, our rivers. No, and then now the government has declared large hydropower project as renewable energy, source of renewable energy. I think these are what that sets the condition to build more large dam over our river and this thing. Yeah, so we joined the largest struggle to, as I said, to scrap the criminal laws, to recognize indigenous people's rights. We question this unsustainable development model, no, and any kind of unsustainable project should not be introduced without the free, prior, informed consent, without the recognizing the rights of indigenous communities. So that's been what we've been asserting in our part of the world, no, along with other indigenous organizations across the northeast part of India. And with that, I would like to thank you, and then looking forward to further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jiten. So as Jiten have given us an introduction, there has been a move on how authorities, governments, and states has been restricting our civic space, our democratic rights, and as Jitan have shared, the judicial system, or could be in the realm of law and policies, contributes to this shrinking space on how people can exercise, freely exercise, safely exercise their right to their democratic rights, right to resist, to air their legitimate concerns and oppositions. And most specifically, as G10 have shared to us, is their how did they exercise their defense of their indigenous people's rights and territories. And it broadens the scope of this, as Jitan have shared, how it impacts the operations of some of the civil society organizations in terms of receiving fundings, how this affects how they manage and protect their forests, and into the uh, bigger context of development uh, development models that is used, that encroach, that comes in, go in the indigenous territories. So actually what Jitan shared, you can access and see their manifesto, the from our friends from Manipur in Northeast India have crafted, as part of our program, crafted a manifesto against judicial harassment. You can access it at IPMSDL.org. So a lot of the situation and the calls is there, where you can send in your help, your support on how you can adopt and really amplify the call, the manifesto of the indigenous peoples in Manipur, in Northeast India, and join them in their fight against judicial harassment. Again, thank you so much, Jiten. So let's go now to another one of our partners in this program to share us how, just like in one indigenous people's territory to another, especially those in conflict, those standing up and fighting for their right to self-determination and liberation. Let's all welcome Ronnie Karani from the Merdeka West Papua Support Network. Hello, Ronnie.
Hello, Paul. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I just shared the screen. Can everyone see that?
Yeah. Can you put it in full screen? Okay, that's okay now. Good.
Thank you very much, Paul. Firstly, I would like to take the opportunity to say greetings in the Central Highlands and also from my language. So it's wa 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 mai kai. I would like to pay respect to the indigenous people of the Ngunnawal land that I'm speaking to you here in the so-called Australia, and paying respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And thank you for the IPMSDL, ICNL, for really bringing us the indigenous people and voices to really share our shared struggles, the fight for our rights. And in the case of West Papua, it's to stop the attacks and judicial harassment of human rights lawyers, human rights defenders, and pro-independence activists. So I'll be speaking with you through the West Papua Support Network, and affiliated member with IPMSDL, and over the years, I'll give a bit more about what the role of Merdeka Support Network. But for now, I will just want to take the moment to, just if you people see these coffins in this image, I just want to take a moment of silence to pay respect to the lives, which in the last 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours, the civilians had a big clash with the Indonesian security forces, the combined police and military, and that riot or clash resulted in over 10 indigenous Papuans lost their lives. And today, the indigenous people in the Central Highlands in Wamena came together to lay these brave souls to rest. And as we can see this, the coffins there, it speaks of the ongoing reality in West Papua, particularly in terms of the indigenous people experiencing the brutal military occupation or military operations ever since. So I will give a little bit of an overview of West Papua, the role of Merdeka Support Network, and also address some of the cases, 3 cases of judicial harassment, particularly the criminalization of pro-independence activists, the lawyer, and also Papuan journalists, and outlining some of the things that we've already working towards, and as well as in terms of demands and how we could strengthen the solidarity. To give a bit of a context about West Papua, as you can see, it's just north of Australia, wherever it is in terms of whether one is in the Torres Strait Island, it's pretty much just very much kilometers, less than one would say, if in the geographical sense of between Canberra and Sydney, West Papua is very much close to Australia. That's how close it is. It's the eastern part of the Indonesia. In Papua, we've got 7 customary territories, as viewed here on the map. I come from the Saireri customary territory, a small island called Serui. The indigenous people of West Papua are made up of 2.5 million out of the 4.5 million population. Since 2010, there was a research made by one of the academics, Jim Emsley, and he concluded that based on the national census, the growth rate of the indigenous population, if it continues the way it is, the indigenous Papuans will constitute the minorities in their own land within the next 20 years. And that was research done in 2010, and now we're already into 2023, going into 2030 coming up. And as I showed the earlier photos, that rate still continues and increases every day in West Papua. And if that continues within the next 20 years, in 2020, the indigenous demography will, at that time, 48.5% will drop drastically to 30% in terms of the percentage or number of indigenous people. So this is very concerning for indigenous people of West Papua if we continue to be under the brutal occupation of Indonesia. About West Papua, and I'm bringing it between the period of 2017 until 2022, the human rights situation is deteriorated markedly, and we've seen with the increased internally displaced persons, but also those that have crossed the border across to PNG. There was massive influx in the 60s, as well as in the 70s and 80s, and it is growing. Military operations, if many have here, particularly in terms of the recent hostage taking of the New Zealand pilot, and this has also now increased security forces heading up towards the Central Highlands. And in terms of the number of political detainees, it has also rose during the 2017 to 2022, particularly in 2019, is the anti-racism protest that took place. Then we saw increasing number of political detainees. And one of the key person whom I'll share his case a bit later is Victor Yemo. He's been a target by the state for organizing, mobilizing, but the state narrative is that he's the man or the guy behind the riots that happened, and so he's still in prison now, and amongst other Papuan leaders. Also, in terms of the special autonomy law governing the region, it was renewed in July 2021. And that has met with massive protest, rejecting the special autonomy law. But the state did not even consider the voice of the indigenous Papuans or the concerns, as well as lack of consultation in the process. And what the government did is through the Home Affairs, as well as the Political, Legal, and Security Affairs Ministry, they went ahead and override any concerns coming from the Customary Council, the Petisi Rakyat Papua, or the Papuan People's Petition, that rallied over 1 million signatures to reject any expansion of the province from 2 to 5 now. And that's the reality that's already happened, and now it's in the process of administrations of respective 3 more new provinces. And partly comes with that as well is where the limitations of political engagements within the system, whether it's political parties, it's been not recognized for any indigenous representation through any of the national mechanism, and that's pretty much in contemporary. But what really underpins the issue of West Papua for many indigenous people is the fact that West Papua hasn't and still fighting to obtain our right to self-determination. And this is the root cause of the conflict in West Papua, whereby Indonesia government will not allow any oxygen or any thing that can aspire the voice of the people, particularly with regards to the right to self-determination. And this comes as well at the set timing in the history when the UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld were underway or scheduled to present at the UN in September 1961 of this program, the decolonization program or OPEX program for West Papua. But 10 days prior to his visit to West Papua to get some sense of what's happening, he was killed in that, which is still suspicious circumstances. And so that also, in terms of the dream of the indigenous people of West Papua to ascertain the freedom, also died in that process as well of his death. So for us, it's a matter of political status as well as a matter of legal status, and this is where we continues to fight. And in pursuing the aspirations, we met with Iron Curtain or the security forces, and then that's where the grievances are around the human rights, as well as the land grabbing, as well as the cases of the political or historical grievances that still we hold on to that and still maintain our fight against the current Indonesian control. In West Papua itself now, the movement, we draw it more. I put it more within this context of the Kasowari. It's got 2 legs, so it's got the moral and political force. As you see on the left side, the moral force is where a lot of our tactical organizations, civil resistance, the churches, the women's, even independent media, Suara Papua, Tablo Jubi, play a very significant role where there's no foreign media coming into the region, this is the voice of the people on the ground. And as highlighted here, Petisi Rakyat Papua itself emerged of over 100 civil society and students, customary-led organizations to really continue amplify the aspirations. And on the political side, it's where engagement on the political and diplomatic arena, the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, but also some of the representatives working within the corridors of provincial parliament, and also through the local body under the special autonomy. It's the People's Assembly. So they also play a role, the MRP and DPRP play that role to bring the voice of the people to Jakarta. And then it also targeting the United Nations, particularly in terms of the Decolonization Committee. In the region is the Pacific Islands Forum, sub-regional is the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and then brought up to more the 79-member grouping of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific grouping, European Union. These are some of the mechanisms within the intergovernmental forums that through the political force, our diplomats continues to engage in that and amplifying the voices of the civil forces inside. A bit about the West Papua Support Network, established after the study conference on West Papua self-determination and liberation in the Philippines in March 2017. And the office has played a big role now to continue to support in various forms to continue to be the support network to link existing West Papua support groups in different countries and build that support committees where there are none, and also plays that role as a safe hub for solidarity strengthening. And thanks to the amazing group of our dedicated activists and supporters in the Philippines, IPMSDL and Paul and Bev and many others who are working in support and in solidarity with us to continue amplify our voices. Now, in terms of some of the cases of the judicial cases, I would like to just play a short video here of our brother Victor Yemo on May 21st, when the government changed their law, particularly to target the Free West Papua movement, or OPM, and criminalize or label the movement as terrorist organization. Victor Yemo became the first victim of that law enforcement under a special operation, Nemankawi operation. And this one is this short interview he did when after the 2019 anti-racism protest, and he had to go into refuge, a temporary refuge, and spoke with the ABC foreign correspondent.
Do you worry for your safety at the moment in West Papua?
Along my life, I worry about my life. Not only me, I worry about my people's lives. All the people in West Papua worry about their life. There is no future for people in West Papua today. I grew up with Salvador. I born with Salvador. And I live with Salvador.
That captures West Papua, and now we're living. Victor Yemo is in prison, particularly to organize that anti-racism protest in 2019. And he's one of our case of criminalization of pro-independence activists, and many others as well in Sorong, particularly with the second
for your safety.
Second case, which is the criminalization of lawyer Leo Iji. And this comes also at the back of the South Maibrat case and the military sweeping into that south part of Sorong. There were 6 Papuan teenagers, and they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and the security forces used them as a scapegoat to claim that they were the perpetrators behind the shooting of the local police base. And the lawyer advocated on their behalf and questioned the manner in which how those teenagers, one was as young as 13, didn't even know what was happening, but now they are still in custody. But through the lawyer and human rights defender, Leo, he questioned the police, and then following his speech, the Sorong City Police called him in and for clarification. So now he's then accused of violating the very law there for questioning the manner in which the police went in to arrest the 6 young teenagers, claiming that they were the ones that carried out the attack. So Leo himself now is, accused of violating particularly the criminal code and information and electronic section law of the government. There is a petition going around, change.org. I just put there the link there to help continue to advocate for his case at the moment. Another case is the press freedom, as I mentioned earlier. West Papua is one of the places that is isolated within Asia and the Pacific. It's the most isolated place on earth, and one of the frontier war that is happening right now. Journalists on the ground, Papuan journalists, continuously to try and report like factually of what's happening, but then they became the target. And on the right here is Victor Mambo. He's now, he continues to be facing or experiencing intimidation and harassment. Eli Dishia in February, 7th of Feb, his home at 4 a.m. there was an explosion right in front of his home, and that just comes at the back of his recent investigation of the IDPs and collaborating with some of the national media investing on human rights cases, and then he became the target as well. So that's one of the cases as well, the Papuan journalist. And all of these cases we've identified, and we know that it's very much difficult. And through our engagement with the project, the ICNL project, we realized that, movement building, particularly on the capacity of the local Papuans as witnesses. So then they become they can do safe witness journalism work, as well as ongoing training and support for them. And so as there are 3 pictures on the side here, particularly in front, there's Amanda Bayan speaking at a peaceful demo. She was targeted and imprisoned for 9 months, particularly for organizing peaceful protests. Thankfully, she's came out and now continue to build movement and strengthen the movement and decentralized coordinated network structures that are happening on the ground. Also, if we see here, education and training is very much key. And part of this is investigative reporting and standardizing this to UN standard. And in January, we did a submission to the AMRIP. It's the expert mechanism on indigenous peoples, and particularly focus on the militarization in those indigenous communities. So this part of the education and training, analyzing the movement, but also ways to really take report. And this also covers the media advocacy as well, making sure digital security is key within some of this training as well. So that's pretty much what is happening now with Engage with projects. That's the 3 key areas that we wanted to build, so that it also supports in terms of our submissions to various intergovernmental bodies or spaces. And and amplify the voice of the people on the ground. And we believe that our struggle is your struggle. And if many of us raise our voices, then the state actors, including the Indonesian president, the Home Affairs Minister, coordinating minister for political, legal, and security affairs, the head of Indonesian police and military, and vice president will begin to take notice and respond to West Papua case. And this also goes beyond. It also kind of like the awareness around non-intergovernmental, non-governmental organization within the region as well, in ASEAN spaces, but also in the Pacific spaces. And it's really crucial. Within the Pacific case, the role of civil society is very important, where holding the government accountable for some of the comments or communiques that they've already made. Particularly in the Pacific Island Forum, there's been a communique to call on the visit of the UN Human Rights Commissioner. And this is one thing that we continue. It's in our calls and demands to make sure that that visit is happening. So we are increasing that pretty much through the European Union Parliament, as well as the 79 member states of the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific spaces, and also importantly through the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and MRIP, which I mentioned earlier. We're aiming to really increase that, and that comes with this training of our Papuan activists on the ground as well. And this is some of the calls that we already kind of like put in place through the project with ICNL. And some of the things that we can also think in terms of concrete action, advocate with and engage with the Papuan struggle, to collaborate with us. Media advocacy is one area that we need some of the support and training as well around that, and we are in the process of developing that. And volunteering as well to support through the Merdeka Secretariat. We need that. The support, particularly translators as well. And thank you, Dewi, for playing a critical role here today in translate and of this conversation. So our Bahasa speaking of Papuan will also listen and understand. And if any, to support in whatever ways, human resources or financial, all welcome. Thank you very much. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, for that very comprehensive journey of showing us on how the judicial harassment is just the tip of the iceberg, as you say, of this historical challenge that the West Papuan people face in terms of how laws and even the current judicial system and how the policies works against indigenous peoples and how they assert their historical resistance to determine their own future, their own identity. Of course, in relation to their territories, resources, and basic freedoms, how to exercise and live safely, democratically every day. Thank you so much, Ronnie, again. For those who just came in, this is Fight for Our Rights, a webinar on judicial harassment against indigenous peoples, part of the project of IPMSDL, Fight for Our Rights, Strengthening Indigenous Peoples' Defense to Counter Judicial Harassment, with the support from ICNL, the International Center for Non-for-Profit Law, ICNL, with the support of our friends from Danida. So let's go to our last but definitely not the least presenter for this afternoon. We will have a recorded video from the International Officer of CATRIBU, the National Alliance of Indigenous Peoples in the Philippines, and also the Global Coordinator of IPMSDL, Ms. Beverly Long. Let's watch this.
Gawis ay agaw kan data ko amin, a pleasant day for all. I am Beverly Longit, Ebuanto Kankanai from the Cordillera, Philippines. I represent CATRIBU, a national alliance of indigenous peoples organizations in the country. CATRIBU is a member organization of the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for for self-determination and liberation. The Philippines is home to around 12 to 15 million indigenous peoples. We roughly constitute around 13% of the 110 million total population of the Philippines. We are spread out in more than 100 ethno-linguistic groups in 65 provinces. The Lumad in Mindanao comprise the majority, or around 61% of indigenous peoples. An estimated 33% are found in Luzon, with the Igorots of the Cordillera comprising the majority. And 6%, such as the Tumandok, are in the Visayas Islands. The figures can be higher or even lower because there is no disaggregated data for indigenous identity or ethnicity. While the Philippine government adopted the 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it refuses to respect and implement these rights. And I would like to present some cases relative to judicial harassment that has worsened in the past several years. One, the government has weaponized the laws against activists with the Anti-Terrorism Act that declare legitimate resistance as terrorism and activists as terrorists. On February 2018, the Department of Justice used the 2007 Human Security Act, this is the old anti-terrorism law, and filed a prescription petition to declare the Communist Party of the Philippines and its New People's Army as terrorist organizations. It listed 650 names, including leaders of the Cordillera People's Alliance like myself, our current chair, Windel Bulinget, and advisory council members, Joan Carling and Joanna Corino. The trial court delisted our names in January 2019 and dismissed the prescription petition in September 2022. However, our names have already been publicly made known as terrorist individuals. Now, under the new 2020 Anti-Terror Act, the Anti-Terrorism Council, through a resolution dated January 30, 2023, designated Dr. Natividad Castro, or Doc Nati, known to us as Doc Nati, as a terrorist individual. Doc Nati is a community doctor serving the indigenous peoples in Mindanao for several decades. And before her designation as a terrorist individual, she successfully defended herself on trump-up charges of kidnapping and serious illegal detention last year. This is exactly what we feared when we opposed the Anti-Terrorism Act. The designation of Dr. Nati can happen to anyone, especially those critical of government programs and policies. Two, state security agents use the judicial system and the courts to harass leaders and active members with fabricated criminal charges. Often, there is no due process of law. Very recently, last January 30, it shocked the Cordillera People's Alliance when the police arrested a longtime staff and research aide, Jennifer Awingan, for rebellion. It was even more shocking when they found out that the warrant of arrest included 6 other activists, 4 who are staff of the Cordillera People's Alliance and 2 other activists from the adjacent Ilocos region. They are now known as the Northern Luzon 7, and it includes, again, the current chair of the Cordillera People's Alliance, Windel Bulinget, who successfully defended himself from trump-up charges of murder last July 2021. Steve Tauli, who suspected state security agents abducted and released in the same day of August of 2022. Sara Abellion Aliques, who has faced several criminal charges like arson and robbery, but the court has eventually dismissed the charges. And Lilu Jimenez, who constantly experienced, like many activists, constant surveillance and monitoring. Common in these cases is the violation of due process of law. In the case of Northern Luzon 7, the prosecution did not inform them that there are pending charges against them because they did not issue a notice of a pending case or a subpoena for preliminary investigation for them to be able to refute the allegations, examine the evidence, and confront the witnesses against them, if any. The prosecution claims because they are unreachable despite them being public persons. 3, the government vilifies activists as terrorists and accuses them of being front organizations of the Revolutionary Communist Party of the Philippines, the New People's Army, and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. More often than not, the criminal cases against indigenous peoples, human rights defenders follow this narrative. It also ridicules and or responds with much violence to the collective actions to demand redress of grievances or assertion of democratic rights. Worst, killing and enforced disappearances of indigenous people's rights defenders continue. Again, in the case of Northern Luzon 7, it states that they were involved in an incident sometime last year in a village in Abra where alleged members of the New People's Army attacked four government soldiers. And it follows the same narrative also in the case of the Tumandok leaders who government forces mercilessly killed in the early morning of December 2022. The commander of the government troops that conducted the operation alleged that the Tumandok leaders were members of the New People's Army and that they fired back when served with search warrants. The same narrative follows the killing of Lumad volunteer teachers, Chad Book and Jorain Lujo, who were conducting community research in February 2021. The killing of 3 farmers in Surigao del Sur on June 2021 while harvesting their abaca, and one is even a 12-year-old whom the military accused as a child soldier. Condemnable now is that the commander of this operation is even considered for promotion anytime this year. This situation is even worsened by social media trolls, the government's National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, and even the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, National Commission of Indigenous Peoples, and the private media companies like the SMNI that spreads this false view, putting activists, our family, our friends, our colleagues at risk. 4, local authorities declare indigenous peoples organizations and leaders as persona non grata. The national chair of the Commission on Indigenous Peoples played an active role in the declaration of persona non grata against Euphemia Colyamat, a Manobo leader, a former member of the House of Representatives, and now the spokesperson of Samdugo, a national alliance of indigenous and Moro peoples in the Philippines. She believes this is because of her role in exposing the government campaign against the closure of Lumad schools in Mindanao, human rights violations, and speaking against the militarization of Lumad communities in the Caraga region. The Cordillera People's Alliance, and I believe other indigenous peoples, organizations, and communities also experienced similar declarations at the height of the pandemic. Fifth, in line with the government's counterinsurgency program, it heavily militarizes indigenous peoples' communities, but militarization also protects mining, energy, commercial plantations opposed by indigenous peoples and local communities. 2 weeks ago, on counterinsurgency operations, the military indiscriminately bombed Baggao, a community at the tip of Luzon Island. This is a community that is home to a mix of indigenous peoples, Agta and Agay, Igorot migrants from the Cordillera, and other lowlanders. Around 150 families fled their homes, leaving their near harvesting agricultural produce, farm animals, and other belongings. The military has also cordoned off the area, preventing access to the community. We assert that we are not criminals or terrorists. Our calls, our demands are just and valid. Our actions to oppose encroachment into our territories are legitimate exercise of our inherent and legal rights to self-determination and development. And in such a situation of repression and exploitation, resisting is justified. We have been part of the project against judicial harassment in the Philippines, specifically against indigenous peoples, and we are one in the development and endorsing this manifesto against judicial harassment, which is a product of a series of consultations and meetings of indigenous peoples and organizations and communities that we in Katribu facilitated. It addresses the growing criminalization of indigenous peoples' human rights defenders and the use of the Philippines judicial system against dissenters, like as I explained earlier. It contains our minimum demand for the government to uphold human rights in its entirety, civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, and respect for international humanitarian law. It reminds all that the state is duty-bound to protect, to secure peace, and protect its citizens. The manifesto also contains our strong condemnation of the use of laws, and the country's judicial system to perpetuate further social inequity, injury, harm, wrong, or violation of people's rights. The manifesto is our contribution to ending judicial harassment and bringing to reality to providing affirmative action in law for indigenous peoples. We have less in life. The manifesto is also our contribution to ending judicial harassment and bringing to reality to providing affirmative action in law for indigenous peoples. We who have less in life should have more in law. Thank you and a pleasant day to all of you.
Thank you so much, Beverly, for that video giving us a context on how judicial harassment materializes, experienced, and faced by indigenous peoples' communities leaders who have been repeatedly silenced and targeted by the legal system, these policies and laws crafted by the government to stifle dissent and really close down the space that is supposed to be a space where people exercise their right to defend their territories, their right to express their legitimate demands and cause. So thank you so much again for our speakers and presenters from Northeast India, from West Papua, and from the Philippines. So this time, we will be opening our floor for questions or comments or inputs. G10, Ronnie, and Ray, to be representing Beverly, will be here to give responses to some of your messages or your questions. So again, for those who just came in, this is Fight for Our Rights, a webinar on judicial harassment against indigenous peoples from the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, with support from our friends from the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, ICNL, and DANIDA. So yeah, you can type in your question, raise your hand if you want to speak, and we will facilitate your question. So again, we thank everyone for coming in here. And in our comment and chat box, we put up the link of the manifestos of these 3 territories and countries for you to have a look on their current situation and current demands. And these countries are also on the process of doing a lot of activities actually in relation to our project in combating judicial harassment, a series of consultations, dialogues with indigenous peoples organizations, members, advocates, national human rights organizations, other organizations working on the same concerns, series of trainings and workshops. And in the future, this project, we are building sort of a combined manifestos of this organization that we wish for everyone to enjoin, to share, to amplify, and to sign on. So maybe I can give the first question for G10, Ronnie, and Ray. What do you think? How since we started the campaign, our program since I think last year, how has things developed? Is it getting better, the situation? And how can our audience here in Asia and in different parts of the world, do you think can support? What will be the things that they can do to help you on this campaign? Who would like to start? Maybe Ronnie or G10?
Jita can go first and I'll come.
Okay. Yeah, I think this initiative is really, really important. One of the major initiative is to reach out to the different communities who are especially at threats or of being subjected to further harassment, no? Because of multiple reasons. And I think they're empowering the community, reaching out to different indigenous groups, empowering on their human rights, especially informing on their human rights. I think it's extremely important, no, at this point of time, and especially those communities who are challenged by the introduction of unsustainable developments, because we that's also one of the areas that we are prioritizing, especially, for example, the areas where the construction of large dam or energy projects, and also especially the infrastructure projects. I think this is one area where we are targeting, and this initiative is already helping us to reach out to different communities whom we are unable to reach earlier. So which means it has also built the confidence and also able to build more solidarity across different indigenous groups. And I think that's extremely important. And learning from the different communities to connect different communities, some of those who already experience the challenge of direct harassment, and often why this is important, because often the harassment in our case it also links directly to the issues of land rights, the violation of land rights, the community land rights. And I think so that's why fostering the confidence and also the ability to assert community land rights, and I think it's extremely important as part of asserting the defense of indigenous rights. So I think this is one area that we are focusing. And then secondly, of course, responding immediately to the situation of violations. And of course, that is one part. So that's why it's important to create more awareness on indigenous people's human rights, but also the challenges of the existing, the limitations of law. We talk about the criminal laws. We talk about many of the emergency law, which actually take away most fundamental rights of many of the communities. So in our case, a lot of us operate in a conflict situation. So which means there is a big disadvantage of many of the indigenous groups. I think it's similar with what is happening in West Papua in a way, because often when there are laws like the National Security Act, this is a preventive law, so which means a person can be detained for 1 year without any trial or without any decision. So it's a preventive detention. So these are very draconian and which often are misused against indigenous leaders, especially those asserting their rights, right against civil rights violation, and also for those targeting for defending the land. So this has helped us to foster more solidarity across different regions, and I think that's a strength of this initiative at this point of time. And then of course, this will be a continued process because because what we are seeing there is an aggressive targeting of land. So which means we've been experiencing this, but then I think there is an increased focus on our land, on our resources, and also targeting the people. So which means we also need to step up our effort to reach out to the different indigenous group, build up the capacity of our youths, build up the capacity of the traditional leaders, and also the customary, the village authorities, and then also to strengthen the leadership of our women, our youths, and also our leaders, And I think that has to be a continuous process, and then strengthening our ability to engage the media, engage the judicial system, and of course I agree with Beverly, when it comes to the challenges of engaging the judicial process, because sometimes the judicial process can be very alien to many of the indigenous tradition and way of life. So sometimes it's quite difficult. Many of the groups, it's very difficult to access to the judicial system in itself, and especially those who are harassed. Just accessing the judicial system itself can be a part of the harassment itself, because it's extremely difficult. And often at the end, justice is denied in often case. And we also talk about the limitations of the law in itself. I think those issues need to be deliberated continuously. Challenging the limitations of the law. We should call for amendment or even the scrapping or complete amendment, complete repeal of many of the emergency and security laws that we talk about. While also continuing our effort to strengthen the rights, the ability of the community leaders to challenge and to resist and to assert community rights as a whole, in responding to the violations due to conflict and also due to the push for unsustainable and false solutions in our land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jiten. That's one good thing that you point out on some of the commonality of this, our partner countries in this project. Is in one conflict area where people an ongoing resistance in the self-determination struggles. And again, and also number two, the commonality of having laws security laws that more often than not, as all of you have shared, has been used, to not to really maintain peace, but to silence indigenous people, especially standing up against, as you have said, unsustainable projects encroaching their land. So, Ronnie, how can people support, or how's the situation progressed?
Yes, when I did the opening with the over 10 people passed away in the past 48 hours, it shows that nothing is improving for the better. Even undertaking the project with laws emerging to really restrict any freedom of expression, assembly, let alone that expansion of the region. But in echoing what Jitan just mentioned, the sustainability of this, what's next from here, it's very critical. The strengthening of the capacity of the witnesses, those on the ground, particularly I've got colleagues here. I see there's a room full with Sayang, some Zoom there. I saw when she put the video, and it was more than at least a handful. I think 10 people are there in that space. Their role, particularly to be witnesses and being able to, as our struggle is your struggle. That's the kind of like the catchphrase that we wanted to make sure that that's amplified, because West Papua is isolated from any human rights organization, from any foreign journalist entering into the region. So any solidarity that we engage or we build with NGOs or civil society organizations or grassroots movement or indigenous organization, that is our lifeline. That is where the voice is amplified through that. And such discussion like this is certainly one of that, to continue to being able to have this, our stories, the Papuan stories, be heard and be amplified. Secondly, it's also highlighting, accessing various mechanisms. I think it's also in the question here as well. And that's something that not often on the ground, our activists on the ground would be aware or known that there are mechanisms that we could tap into. An example was the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous people, that one. We didn't know that until it came to our understanding that that's one platform. So early this year, with this project in mind, like it's happening, we used that. And so we made submission into MRIP, and hoping that if there is other working groups within the UN Human Rights Council or UN Permanent Forum that people are aware of, and to really just guide us that, okay, this is how you submit to, or can submit through this. Please let us know through the Merdeka Support Network email or IPMSDL, and then we can really utilize those spaces to really amplify. And so it's one of our goals is to be able to allow all these submissions